Hello and welcome to this really important and hopefully interesting session on Housing First and how it is a solution to street homelessness. I'd like to offer a really warm welcome from World Habitat and the Housing First European Hub. We are delighted to see so many of you here in person and also joining us online. I'm hoping that, as you'll see from the agenda, we've got a really action-packed afternoon. We want to take full advantage of having so many people with experience to share and solutions and a willingness to work together. So we're really hoping that you will take the opportunity to ask us questions, to engage with us, and to share your own experiences today. My name is Louise Winterburn, and I work for World Habitat. We're an international housing foundation set up 40 years ago to find and share the best housing solutions from around the world. Every year we run a competition in partnership with UN Habitat to find award-winning housing solutions to the most challenging housing problems. Even in the most difficult of circumstances, we find amazing organisations and people like yourselves and people who are here with us today to share their experiences, overcoming and finding solutions to safeguard the right to housing. We often find those within social housing, and particularly, as we'll be focusing on today, organisations who are actually ending street homelessness. I'm so pleased that today we are going to be joined by so many people who've been involved with World Habitat, shaping our work over the years, including a number of World Habitat Award winners and partners from our programmes. All these people are continuing to inspire and create real change, as we'll hear about this afternoon. We're going to spend our first hour hearing from colleagues at the heart of Housing First within Europe, and I'm delighted that we have so much experience in the room. After that, we will be swapping over, and you'll see that we'll be introducing 4 more amazing organisations involved in housing projects in their own cities and countries to end street homelessness. And finally, for those of you who are joining us in person, some time to network, to ask questions, to share experiences. So we're really looking forward to a really great day, and I'd like to hand over to Samara from the Housing First European Hub. Thank you.
Hi, I'm going to stand up because I'm small. I wanted to say that we're going to take just about 55 minutes to talk about the Housing First Europe Hub, and we'll introduce ourselves because we all do different sorts of things in the Housing First Europe Hub, and we'll mix it up so you don't have to listen to one of us talk for hours and hours. So my name is Samara Jones, and I am one of the coordinators of the Housing First Europe Hub. I'm originally from Canada, but I'm based in Brussels, Belgium. So maybe we do a quick introduction, each of us, and then I'll pass over.
Hello everybody, good afternoon. My name is Juha and I come from here, Helsinki, Finland, and I work at the Y Foundation, and I'm also the other coordinator for the Housing First Europe Hub.
I like the pink one. Thank you. Hi, my name is Saya, and I'm the head of research in Y Foundation and also co-lead the research cluster or the knowledge development working group of the Housing First Europe Hub.
Thanks, Saya. Hi, my name is Lisa O'Brien. I work for Focus Ireland in Ireland, and I'm involved with the Hub in relation to Housing First for Youth, where I'm the manager of the South East Youth Services in Ireland, and we run Housing First for Youth programmes. But I'm also involved with training, etc., with the Housing First Hub.
Okay, so we have a short presentation, and I think, can I use this clicker? Does this work? Yeah. Okay, here we go. Aha. So there we are. So I just wanted to start with a slide to talk to you a little bit about why we talk about housing first and ending homelessness. Sorry. Yeah, that's maybe easier. So housing first, and I'll talk about the principles in just a minute, but housing first is really simple. And I've heard a new sort of definition of housing first over the last few months from Finland, which is really a leader in housing first, that, we have some very specific principles around housing first to be able to ensure that we're delivering quality service and making sure people are properly supported. And I'll talk about those in a minute. But the most important thing is that there are 2 principles for housing first. One is people need their own housing in normal, social, or affordable housing where they sign their own rental contract, and they need the support that they require that needs to be adapted to what they need for as long as they need it. So I think that's a really important thing to keep in mind, that it's very straightforward what we're talking about. We're talking about making sure that people have a home in which they can live and they can continue to live with the support that they need to stay in that house. So when we talk about that, then, we also have been looking at the Finnish example and examples elsewhere in Europe that you can see now, for example, in Scotland, in other countries like France and hopefully Denmark and more and more and more, where you take this idea of starting with housing and you apply that to your housing and homelessness systems so that you can say, rather than continuing to build temporary accommodation, we start with the housing, we make sure that there's support is there, and we can actually make an impact on reducing and ending homelessness. And we use this, we know that it works, and we know that there have been many pilot projects on this, and which is important, and we've learned some fantastic lessons from those pilot projects. And I've spent much of my time saying we don't need any more new pilot projects, but I do understand that sometimes people need to start with a pilot project as long as that pilot project then becomes something that is then embedded in your own policy and practice. Come on in, everyone, don't worry, we just started. Hi, Piotr. So, but we know Housing First works. We have the evidence from studies, from pilot projects, from Europe, from North America. We know it works. So I think it's important that we can use that evidence base to build good practice and good policy. And I'm just going to highlight the sort of more elaborate version of those principles I talked about just now. That basically, Housing First is a way to address and end homelessness and prevent homelessness, starting with a right to housing and making sure that that person in that housing has the support that they need, and that they are sort of the ones who are directing the support workers to make sure that it's the kind of support that they need. You take a recovery approach with a harm reduction approach, which means that you're removing the conditions that are often put on people when they are offered a place to stay in a sort of traditional staircase model, where they're almost required to solve their problems around addictions or mental health before they can have access to their own housing. And so this flips it on its head and says, let's work with people at their pace in their own homes, which just makes sense. So who are we to say all of these amazing things and talk about trying to end homelessness with Housing First? Well, we are a diverse partnership that started 6 years ago now, and we were kicked off and launched by Y Foundation and FEANSA. And FEANSA is the Federation of National Organizations fighting homelessness across Europe, and Y Foundation, which maybe everybody here has hopefully heard of, is the leading social housing provider and Housing First provider here in Finland, and has been really a champion for making sure that national policy and local practice reflect these key principles and actually have an impact in ending and eradicating homelessness here in Finland. And what we did is we put out a call. We said, look, we know that Housing First works at an individual level. We can see from Finland that it can work at a national level. Who wants to work on this together? And so we've created this partnership where we bring partners together, governments. You might recognize some of the logos. We have governments, ministries, we have some cities, we have some federations of NGOs, we have foundations, and we have housing partners. And what's most important is that we need all of these people, all of these types of organizations and entities in order to be successful if we really want to make an impact on ending homelessness. So we're very happy to have this very motivated partnership around the table. And as I said, our whole idea is that we move from this top picture where a lot of the energy and money goes into creating emergency responses to homelessness. There will always be a need for some emergency responses, but if we put all of our energy and money into that, it means it's very hard to focus on the prevention and the housing and the supports. So what we're talking about is moving from this top slide to the second one, where we put an emphasis on prevention and an emphasis on housing and supports, and make sure that there is something for people when they fall into homelessness, but that response is as quick and as short as possible. So how does this all work? And we've done some studies recently to sort of look at what are the key ingredients. What makes this work? What makes it work in Finland? What's making it work in Scotland? What's helping to move things along in France, both at national and local level? And the key ingredients are there, and perhaps they're no surprise, but it's really, you need to have people who are dedicated and motivated and who can understand that this quite ambitious objective of ending homelessness is actually possible, and are dedicated to moving the sometimes very complicated pieces of the puzzle in the right direction towards that goal. A lot of that is around changing how we work in terms of the social work that's delivered, changing how we work around allocating social housing to people who are homeless or at risk of homelessness, changing how we fund or finance services or housing or benefits. So there's a whole shift in our working culture that needs to happen. And there's a lot of shifting around how we work directly with people who are experiencing homelessness or who are at risk of homelessness, to understand that the people who are going to be renting apartments and housing first, they're the ones who need to be able to make the decisions. It's not the social workers themselves who are making the decisions. So in many cases, that requires a lot of shift, that requires training, that requires a new kind of reflection. And in some cases, it's a smoother path. And what we know is that people who work in Housing First services also themselves feel more satisfied because they know that they're able to do their job better than they were before. We need the right structures, and then this is a big call out to all the housing people here in the room. There's a housing crisis everywhere around affordable housing, and especially for people who are often forgotten and often left off those social housing lists or affordable housing options. So that's a big piece of the work we have to do, is where's the housing, what are the housing options, how do we work together to make sure that there are housing options available. And then this comes down to the last two, which are very much at government level, but that can be city level, it can be regional level, it could be national, and hopefully even EU level. We need stable and predictable funding so that if we're going to make some shifts, that people can plan and make sure that they have funding in place to change over to a new approach. We need the political commitment. It's interesting, the Irish minister was here this morning saying that, you need commitment beyond one political mandate. So how do you do that? And I think that's a really important lesson we can learn from Finland, where over the past 10 to 15 years, there has remained this commitment, no matter what color the government coalition has had. So I think that that's a really important lesson to take away. So, what do we do? And then I promise I will share the microphone with my colleagues, but how do we make this happen? Well, we often say that this is our network is, our partnership is an opportunity for people to join and also do some work. Because as Juha and I said, we are the coordinators of the hub, but there's only two of us. And so what we do is we work with all of the partners to develop projects, to develop training, to develop support on different issues, to develop research, which Saya will talk about. And the idea is that we all learn from each other in the best possible way, and we all really take that practical knowledge from different parts of Europe and really exchange it in the best way possible and support people to do things on the ground. And I think we'll come to that in just a minute. But I think I will switch the order just a little bit, and we'll come and talk about advocacy and policy development at the end, but I'll let Saya first talk about our working group on knowledge development.
Knowledge development is a new term for me, because we used to call it a research cluster, but I think this knowledge development actually describes it better. So I'm one of the leads of the research cluster. Another one is Francesca Albanese from CRESCER UK. I started as one of the members of the cluster, and now Francesca and I lead the cluster or the working group. I need to learn these new words. Anyway, the story, if I tell you the story of the research cluster, how we started, what we've done, and what our plans are, maybe that's the easiest way to describe it. So we had at the beginning about 15 or 17 partners and their researchers participating in the work group. And we were kind of thinking that, do we start doing research ourselves, which is quite heavy taking, thinking that we all got our own research post to fill and research to do? Or do we commission research, or do we do some other activities that support the other activities of the hub? So the first thing we did was we did this kind of a categorizing exercise. So we had a look in different countries what research is there and what's missing. And it was very clear that there is already quite a lot of research on housing first. The other work we did in the first few years was the evaluation, which is often linked to research, evaluation templates, to help our partners to evaluate their housing first projects. So if you are interested in that, all the information is available in the hub website. The evaluation template has got a heavier version where you evaluate absolutely everything. But as we know, Europe has got different practices, so maybe the heavy version doesn't apply to your services. So there is also a lighter version available if you are interested in evaluation. So after that, we started thinking that how we are all very busy and we all need to read papers and we all need to talk about these papers, that why don't we share this load, that we take turns, and we started to publish Housing First Research Digest. So each of us in turn selected either interesting papers and did a little summary on that, or an interesting topic and found papers around that topic. So those are also available in the hub website. After that, we started to kind of think that how different is housing first what's the state of housing first in different countries. And we commissioned a piece of research, like a scoping study. It was done by Nicholas Please and a couple of other researchers. So it looks into what practices are there and talks about the pilots and state of homelessness and so on. So that scoping study is also available for you to have a look. That's now slightly out of date because it was done, I think, a couple of years before COVID. And the situation in many, many countries is different. So we are now thinking whether we should maybe take some aspects of that study and update that. The other thing we were thinking was that how do we encourage young or early career researchers to do the research on housing first? So we announced this award, Early Career Housing First Research Award, which we have now given out 3 times. So young research or early career researchers sent us their papers, and we evaluated the papers together with the observatory, and then we gave out the award in the FEANZA research conference. What else have we done? Okay, so that was kind of like the early years of the research cluster. But now, as I said, that there is already quite a lot research done on Housing First. We changed our approach somewhat, and now in the future, that's why also we changed the name, the knowledge development. We are trying to feed the research into other activities of the hub. So we're supporting, for example, the advocacy group or training group or any group with the information we get from research. What Samara was saying, this is the key ingredients of what we do. We need the research evidence to get the political backing for Housing First, or we need the research to know what we train on. So this is what we are doing. So if you are interested in joining the knowledge development work group, please get in touch with me. I'll put you into mailing group. The next meeting we are planning to have is in the research conference in Bergamo. And after we haven't now been able to meet properly, so I think we kind of like clean the table, see what's the state of our work, and we start again. But one thing I need to also say, the digest, I just sent the latest version of the Housing First Research Digest to our comms person of the hub, and it will be published very soon, and it's about Housing First, meaningful activities and well-being, and it's from Ireland. So it will be very interesting to hear your feedback on that. But I don't know if there was anything else you wanted me to say. So who's next? You. Good luck.
Always needed. Yeah, I'm going to talk about the capacity building and especially the community of practice, and then the national networks of Housing First. So community of practice is basically a Housing First manager group. So we established it just before COVID, so unfortunately we haven't been able to see each other that many times face to face, but during the COVID period we have our regular online meetings about once a month. And what we have learned is that it's a really good tool for the Housing First manager to share their feelings, expertise and good practices among others. Because what we have learned is that the many service providers, they share the exact same challenges. So especially during the COVID time, there has been the staff well-being on the table, also the tenant well-being, and all other these kind of things that has become quite surprisingly because of the COVID situation. So what we have done with the group is that we have started a series of webinars, and I think we have 3 or 4 so far that we have done, and you can find all those webinars from the Housing First Europe Hub YouTube channel, so please follow that one so you can see all the webinars that we have done with the group. But I think now if you're working in the Housing First and you're a manager, I think it would be a great opportunity to join the community of practice, because actually in September we are meeting each other live once again in Brussels. And what we're going to do there is to have a 2-day or 1.5-day workshop. And basically we're going to do the same thing as Saya mentioned with knowledge development. So we're going to start from the scratches. So we see what kind of plan we made 2 years ago, and we see if there is still some elements that we're going to keep and what new things we're going to add to the work plan that we're going to then take forward. So if you have any interest, please send me a message, me, Samara, or Saya a message, and we'll make sure that you're on the mailing list and you'll be invited to Brussels as well. The other thing that we are not doing yet, but in the future, hopefully by the end of the year, is that there are many Housing First national development networks in Europe at the moment. And what that means, I use Finland as an example because I have worked in one of those networks. The networks work so that they bring all the key stakeholders into the same table. So for example, in Finland, the people with lived experience, NGOs, service providers, housing providers, local authorities, and also the government organizations working together, developing the Housing First and also the homelessness work all together. And what we do in the Finnish network is that we held different kind of training sessions on various topics. For example, trauma-oriented work orientation, loneliness, etc., you name it. And all those topics come from the need of the organizations who work directly with homeless people. So I think it has proven to be a really useful tool to get the knowledge to the people who work on Housing First. But one other thing is that training is a core element, but we use it as a much more bigger things as well, if you can say that. So what we done, for example, in Finland, that we did a Housing First 2.0 report. So we have over 30 different organizations on board, and over the period of 6 months, we made this new report that what Housing First should look like in the future in Finland. And because there were so many different organizations and stakeholders involved, it brought this kind of ownership to the report as well. So the report didn't end, in the shelf and collecting dust. Cities and local authorities have actually put those things that we decided together into action, and they are now doing it on a local level in the latest homelessness national program. So I'm really, really happy about that. But as we have learned, in many countries there are also similar networks. For example, Scotland, Netherlands, Ireland, hopefully in Sweden as well in the future. And we have had various meetings with different national networks, and we have learned that maybe if we could bring all the national networks together in the same table a couple of times a year maybe, to share the good practices, how to lobby the politicians, how to lobby the decision makers, etc. There are various things that are pretty much the same, and the challenges are the same. So why not share all those best expertise and learn from each other? So if you have a National Housing First network in your own country, please send us a message once again. And especially if you don't have, please send us a message, because I think that would be a good way to engage the work within the Housing First Europe Hub towards that in the future your own country, or why not city at the first, would have own Housing First network. But that's all from me, and now to listen.
So, good afternoon. I might talk to you from this side just because I'm aware it's the afternoon and everyone is tired and I'm the last to speak on this. So, Samara spoke about prevention, and for Housing First, or for the Housing First Europe Hub, prevention being really, really important. And so you can't look at Housing First, or you can't think about prevention unless you address youth homelessness. And from the very beginning, the Housing First Europe Hub were very, very supportive about what is the best practice around that, and can Housing First fit? And from the research that came from the States and from Canada, we found that using the typical Housing First model doesn't work for young people who are experiencing homelessness or who are at high risk of homelessness because of their developmental stage. And I could talk to you all day about this, but we're doing a session tomorrow morning. So if you're interested in finding out more about Housing First for Youth, the specific model, please come along to that. But for me today, I'm talking about the Housing First for Youth and what the Hub has done for that. So early on, we started 2 pilot projects. I know Samara hates the pilot project, but it was years ago. And I'm happy to say that both projects are now firmly placed. But they were in Scotland and in Ireland. And they were very, very successful. And there were 2 different types. So speaking to you as the majority of people, and it's a social housing conference, the main difference in Housing First for Youth is that a variety of accommodation is used. And that means that we need to partner with social housing bodies. We need to partner with our local authorities. We need to partner with other services to provide that service of Housing First for Youth. And that's something that we really, really want to press to you today, to think about how can you be involved, because one of the things we're talking about housing crisis, and we're talking about access to housing, and young people who are homeless are at the very, very bottom of the list in terms of their ability to access housing. And very often, from some of the social housing bodies that we would work with, that they would have said that they were very fearful around getting involved with young people. So using this model, and please talk to us if you're a social housing body and interested in prevention work and interested in how can you provide support to young people, but making sure, like Samara said, a very similar vein to the Housing First adult model, that it's not just the house, that we're putting in place the absolute proper supports. From a hub perspective, the support has been immense for Housing First for Youth. Our main goal at the moment is scaling up Housing First for Youth, recognising it as a different model to Housing First, and then how can we scale it up. We've been really, really lucky in terms of the hub has supported a lot of training across Europe, and with that has come a lot of new projects. So we now have Housing First for Youth projects in the Netherlands, we have Housing First for Youth projects in France, in Spain are just about to start. Denmark are just about to start, so it's a really exciting time for us in Housing First for Youth, but we definitely want to see more applications, so we would love for you to talk to us if you're interested. The kind of things that the Hub have done, I'm a frontline manager and I manage a Housing First for Youth project. So the kind of things that the Hub has done for me has provided me with training, provided me with motivation sometimes when it's lacking. Can you go back to that thing to remind me of why we're trying to do this in the first place? They've also provided support and some of the stuff that you have spoken about as well around that community of practice, the importance of speaking to each other. And I know tomorrow morning we have someone from Amond Housing Association who's going to talk about her experience of working with the Rock Trust in relation to Housing First for Youth, because she would say that traditionally as a social housing body, they would work with people who have a general housing need. They certainly weren't working with homeless, and they certainly working with young people who are homeless. So she's a very interesting woman to talk to see how she changed and what they did to make that work. So if you are interested or your city is interested in Housing First for Youth, please let us know and we'll provide as much support as we possibly can to help upscale that, because that's what we want to see happening. So I'm going to hand you back to Samara now. Thank you very much for your attention.
Great. To everybody else. And I think all of the things that Lisa and Saya and you have talked about lead into what we also do in our other work group, which is on advocacy and policy development. Because like I said, it all links back to how do we make sure that the practice that's happening on the ground in services or in cities or in governments also feeds into the frameworks and government policy that we need to make sure that we have a shift in our system and to end and prevent homelessness. And so on the advocacy and policy development side, we've done a number of interesting things in the past. And most recently, I think things that could be really interesting and useful for you. We have just published on our brand new website, which you can see today live, a sort of introductory guide to EU funds. So if you're an EU country and you want to use EU funding to try and kickstart Housing First or get some funding to support Housing First in your region or your city, the guide is there to help take you through some of the key steps, and most importantly, direct you to people who've done it before and who can share their experience with you, because I think that's the most valuable. So that's a big piece of work we've done on EU funding and how that can help you. And also this past year, we had a conference in Madrid where we looked at this question of if you're going to make a bigger change, if you're going to change your system, what do you need to have in place? And so we worked with a think tank here in Helsinki called Demos Helsinki to help sketch out what does that look like in different kinds of welfare systems. So there's a paper on that. And what we did then within the hub was talk to all of our partners in different countries and look at like what's working. What are the good examples of how you've made progress over the last few years? And how can you share, or what can you share with peers and colleagues around Europe and beyond? And so that paper is also available on the website and quite useful. And what we're doing now in the next little while, I hope will be also helpful for you, is that we're available and interested in working with cities or with housing providers or with whatever level of interest you may be at to help to figure out what your needs might be if you're going to start working on Housing First. So at any level of where you are on Housing First, we can help you to maybe implement a plan that you already have, provide training, provide a space in which you can start to bring people together in a network like Juha was mentioning. So that's a big piece of our work as well, is to be available. We keep saying call us, and it's true, call us and we will actually respond and try and sit down with you and think about what's the most useful thing for you in your city. So if I can think of one, a recent one through World Habitat actually is that in April, I remember the date because it was my birthday, so April 7th, there was a meeting in Pula in Croatia, and the very dynamic team there said, okay, we're going to organize a meeting around how do we start talking about housing first, how do we start talking about ending homelessness in our city. And they spoke to World Habitat, and World Habitat, as part of the hub, said, well, why don't we have somebody from the hub speak and bring the questions to the table that they need to hear, and give them an opportunity to ask some questions to somebody from outside. Because what we've seen is that quite often having somebody from outside come into that sort of discussion helps people to feel a bit more open, helps people to feel like they can ask the questions that they might be afraid to ask their colleagues or their peers from across town otherwise. And it just sort of, it's a quite useful icebreaker, and it lets people see, as Juha and Lisa were saying, that you're not alone in trying to do these difficult things. So that's just one small example of something that we can do for you in our work on advocacy and policy development. And maybe just one more thing on that maybe we're the only ones who've mentioned this today, but there's a EU platform on combating homelessness. It was mentioned this morning as well. And so that's also an opportunity for everybody in Europe working on homelessness and ending homelessness to call on this platform at EU level to really push for actual change, maybe call on some new funding for ending homelessness. And so that's something that we as a hub are prepared to engage with and bring the perspective of our partners to that level as well. So I think that is it for our presentation part, but we really wanted to use some time, if we have a few minutes left, to ask you if you have questions or if you have things you want to share with us. We wanted this to be as much of a workshop or networking session as possible. So I think if we can, we'll close our formal session here and ask if you have questions or comments that we turn it over to you. There's a question.
Aloha, my name is Brandy. I'm from Hawaii. I'm interested to hear more about your Housing First for Youth, because you talked about, or you mentioned that it's different than your Housing First model. So if you could go into a little bit more about that, and if their core principles are different, because there was a slide earlier. Thank you.
No problem. Now I'm on the spot. No, the main difference is, first of all, we have 5 core principles in Housing First for Youth. But without going into major detail about it, the main differences when we're talking about young people is that the causes of them becoming homeless are different. Their developmental stages are different. So their educational needs are different, where they're at in terms of even brain development. Capacity is different, capacity for change, capacity for learning. Social development, all of these things are very different to adults who are experiencing homelessness. So we need to respond in a different way. The biggest difference, I suppose, practically speaking, is what I spoke of in relation to the types of accommodation, because it's not always appropriate to give an 18-year-old a long-term home for life, because obviously when they're 18, their lives are going to change and evolve, and so too will their housing needs. So it's not always appropriate to give a long-term house at 18, so we need to use a variety of accommodations. Also, in terms of young people do need to learn. So when you're talking about creating homes, managing homes, and being involved, social and community integration, for young people who are homeless, very often what they have lost is their family connection, and with that, their social connection. So it's really, really important that we try and rebuild that at a time when those people are the people who usually teach young people how to live, I suppose. And so it's really important that that's in place. So sometimes that means that a young person might want to do a transitional program, for example. And in Housing First for Youth, what we say is that's okay. You can do a transitional program. We'll stay with you throughout the journey until you end up in the place that is going to be your long-term home, or that you're happy to not have supports anymore. And the other key thing then is that no time limit on the support. So when a young person is referred into the Housing First for Youth, that we stay working with them until they no longer want us or need us. So I hope that answered your question. But as I said, tomorrow morning, we're doing a full session on Housing First for Youth where we'll have much more detail about it. But thanks for the question.
Hello, my name is Gelinde Gutheil from the Austrian Federation of Limited Profit Housing Associations, and we have several members who are already involved in Housing First together with social service organizations. And my question is, maybe I missed that, but in the slide at the beginning, I did not hear the requirement of a first-hand contract, that it would be an obligatory requirement for Housing First. I think you mentioned it, but on the slide it is not. So my question is, would you say it is an absolutely requirement, or I mean, for me, it's totally sure that that is the gold standard. But sometimes it is easier to convince our members to engage in Housing First when at the beginning it's a second-hand contract. What is your opinion on that? Or is it? Do you have the discussion within the hub as well, or would you really say second-hand contract so that the contract is on the social organization and is sublet to the tenant? That is not Housing First, and you would prefer not to develop those models any further?
The pink one is always the right one. Yeah, I can start an example from Finland. What we have trying to do here is that actually, because it's hard to get apartments from the private market. So in those cases, we have used sublease models. So for example, organization or city has leased the apartment from the private market, and then they have subleased it to the future tenant. And in my opinion, if that's needed to have enough apartments to do Housing First with the proper support, why not? And I think it's a good way to have those apartments especially from the private side, because it's really difficult nowadays. And of course, the prices are skyrocketing. So if you can have a good deal with amount of the rent, and then the sublease model, and the tenant has no problems with it, I wouldn't see any problems in there.
Maybe just to add that, yeah, I think it is the gold standard, and it's what we should be aiming for. But indeed, I think what we see also in Finland and why it's successful here, and you see it in Scotland as well moving forward, is that you have to be pragmatic as well, right? So, and I think I would say that the tenant needs to sign a lease and needs to be the person on the lease. And so if it's a sublet from somebody, from an organization, that's not quite as secure, but I think it's a really important step in the right direction. And we would still encourage landlords to recognize that. I think it would also be a learning moment, right? To say to landlords, social landlords, that you can have the person sign the contract because we know the support is going to be there to help that person should any problems arise. So I think that I would say both, right? So you have to be pragmatic as well, but I think it's a moment to say, look, we've got the evidence to prove that it does work. And I think that's, yeah, it is a discussion, but I think it's also really important for the other issue that comes up is that separation between the housing and the support. And so that one is really clear. And that's where you see also places where they're doing Housing First, particularly in the Netherlands, where they have the contract and they have the support. And so I think that's maybe more of an issue than the subletting. So I can't see.
Hello, I'm Céline Muller from Eurocities. Thank you for this panel discussion. I wanted to ask 2 questions, if that's all right. Yes, is it still on? My first question would be the first response we get from big cities where there is a huge housing crisis when we talk about Housing First is, how do we do Housing First when we don't have houses? It's the case in many cities. Just like we can try to use the private rental market, but it's fully used and it's very expensive. Not all cities have big bunch of houses that are available. So have you looked into that, and what kind of solutions can you suggest? The second question would be, when we talk about housing first, most of the time we hear about cases from Western and Northern Europe. I would say the culture on working towards ending homelessness in Eastern Europe is very different. So how can we help go and look into long-term solutions while also respecting historical reasons and all of the things that mean that it's sometimes harder for them to go into that direction and look into all of that. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you for the good questions, and I start with the second one. And actually, what we have done within the Housing First Europe Hub and also with Y Foundation, that, for example, to Romania and Poland, we have offered training sessions that we have held together with them. We have helped them to organize these kind of Housing First networks, etc. And of course, respecting their past and their way of working. But I think the goal that we had is to ignite some kind of spark, to show what is out there, what different options there is, and then offer the training and the knowledge behind those things. And I think it had worked quite good actually. And we have a good relationship with many cities in Poland and also Romania, and now also we are working with the Croatia, the city of Pula, etc. So I think there is a willingness to know about the housing first, and willingness to change the way they are working, in the shelter sector, etc. So I think we have quite a good momentum at the moment regarding that. Yeah.
And maybe just to add to that, well, we have our Polish partners here in the room, so if they want to add something. But also, the Czech Republic is a country where they have been a leader in doing Housing First for families, using EU funds for Housing First, setting up their own training, and really working hard to make sure that it's integrated into government policy. So maybe it's less well known than in Western Europe, but it's definitely absolutely possible. And I think the challenges or the differences are smaller than the similarities. When we bring everyone together, and we've just started a new train the trainer cohort for trainers who will then go back and train in different countries. Everyone is facing the same problems, and I think that kind of transitions into your first question around housing. Everybody faces the same problem on housing. Everyone does. And if I'm being really cheeky and controversial, I just say, well, we can't use that as an excuse. We can't use it as an excuse not to do something for the people who have, for as long as possible, been always put at the bottom of any kind of list in terms of accessing housing. So we have to find a way to respond to that. We have to look at the situation of people who are homeless or at risk of homelessness and recognize that their needs are often more urgent. And that's a hard thing to accept. And I mean, sometimes you can use the emergency room analogy that if you're having a heart attack and I've broken my ankle, I will of course say, please, treat the heart attack first. I mean, sometimes that can work, but it's very hard. It's very hard because there's not enough housing to go around for everybody at the moment and not enough affordable housing. So I think we have to make partner, and this is why we work in a network and a partnership, because there are different solutions in different places, and we need to learn from each other. And an event like this, where we're calling for more social housing for everybody, but including people who really, really need it, I think that's really important. And maybe I'll just say another activity that we're starting is next Tuesday, we're having an informal meeting on exactly that question. Where can the housing come from? Where is it coming from now? Where should it come from? Where can we kind of try and create more housing? So if anybody is interested and hasn't already signed up for that informal meeting, it's next Tuesday morning online. Just drop me an email after this and I'll make sure that you get the invite. But I don't know, I'll pass it back. I don't know if you have anything to say on housing. Build it. That's what Y Foundation is.
And now the killer line I need to think about. No, but I think it's the same question everywhere. And last week I was in Switzerland, and the exact same question came up, but we don't have enough housing. So I was lucky enough that I could have 2 workshops there where there were the political leaders and also the housing association leaders and the social service leaders. And I said that now you have 45 minutes time to come up with some plan how you're going to provide more housing. And it's not an excuse that we don't have enough housing. And after the 45 minutes, I think there were actually quite good elements that could work, because they find out that they actually have quite a good amount of affordable social housing, but it's targeted wrong. So I think it's a good example that many big cities, especially, they have quite a bit of affordable social housing, but they are not targeted towards homeless people. So I think that is one quite easy way to have more housing. And then, like Samara said, you have to be pragmatic, like that example of subleasing. And then what we have done in Finland, we renovate the shelters to housing first units. So within a 2 year of time, we get 300 to 500 studio apartment for homeless people. And I think you need to be innovative and think outside the box where to find the houses, because if we don't, then in a 10 years time we'll be in the same exact place asking the same question. So yeah.
Hello, Pascal Roelands. I'm Managing Director of a social housing company in Brussels, municipality of Evere, and we're managing a Housing First project with partnerships. And I was wondering if in your research you were already looking for the effects on the neighborhood, because that's something we have to address in the moment. We started the project 2 years ago. Very, very calm a neighborhood with elderly people who are in the philosophy of Housing First, who are with us, in fact. But sometimes in the practical installation, it provokes some problems with individuals, not with the whole group. So I was wondering if you had already done research to address these difficulties. What are the best practices to face them? Because, in fact, these inhabitants can, at the moment, address to the municipality politics to make a stop the project, what I don't want to. Because I'm quite convinced of the good things for the people who are in the housing projects, but it's the neighborhood around who can sometimes suffer from it.
In terms of research, I would say that we haven't done within the work cluster or the work group anything on the neighborhood yet. But I could give you some examples from Finland. What we do here, we do focus very heavily on the neighborhood work. Before any, for example, supported housing units are placed there, the neighborhood knows what's happening. And if there are any issues within the supported housing unit, there's always one contact person they can phone. So it's not something that it kind of escalates, then the rumor starts, but there is immediate contact who you can, contact person who you can contact, and you can take it from there. Also, I think the residents are visible in the neighborhood in a good way. They can also be visible in many other ways, but they keep the neighborhood clean. They wear the vests and they do good for the whole neighborhood, not just the immediate courtyard of the supported housing units. So they are there picking the litter and so on. Also, we invite the neighborhood to come and see what's happening. So there are people like you and me living in these supported housing units, ordinary people in ordinary apartments, just to kind of trying to bridge the gap between us and them. So those are kind of like a couple of practical examples what we do in Finland. I don't know if you want to add something.
Maybe it's just that in those neighborhood meetings, there's usually also police department involved. in a way that they can, cut the rumors immediately that there hasn't been more crimes and the area is actually more safe, etc. But usually that is the case in Finland at least.
I could give you a practical example of a supported housing unit I visited in Finland a couple of weeks ago. There's a supermarket near the unit, and there were lots of issues. Things got stolen and stuff. But the attitude of the supermarket owner, or the guy who runs the supermarket, was completely different. He wanted to. There are people who were in my previous session and they heard the same story, but he wanted to solve the problem. He was very proactive and say, okay, there are issues. It's not necessarily your residents, and very likely it's not your residents, but they get the blame. So he started to work with the supported housing units, and now one of the residents is working in the supermarket. And somehow that has calmed the situation completely. So there can be some tiny interventions that make a very big difference.
And maybe I'll just add that I think it's a really interesting question and point, and maybe something that we could take to our community of practice session, and something we can discuss. We're, like Juha said, we're meeting in person in Brussels in September, but that we do these online webinars, and those are the kinds of questions that I think are really useful for us to then put onto the webinar, invite a few speakers from our partners to really have the open discussion, because it's only through talking to others that you can maybe think of how you could apply those kinds of ideas or suggestions in your own context. But I think it's a really useful point to raise. And then maybe I know we have to wrap up, so maybe I will just conclude by saying that we're a very open partnership. All of our resources and materials are available online on the website. And like I alluded to, we train trainers, and we have a training cohort going at the moment. And that means that in maybe not every language of the EU, but in most of the languages of the EU, somebody has come on our training program and is available in your language, in your country, to develop with you a training program for frontline workers, for managers, for cities, for housing providers. And so I wouldn't hesitate, if you're interested and haven't got that kind of training yet, to take a look at our website, see, reach out to us and we'll put you in touch. And the other thing is we're an open partnership that if it's something you're really interested in doing and being involved in, you can join us. I've put out some flyers at the back that gives a bit more information about the hub and about how to join, but definitely just drop us an email if you're interested. And we'll be here for the networking session at the end as well. So if anybody has other questions, we'll be happy to talk to you then. But thanks for all the questions.
A very quick change. We've got 4 more guests coming to join us, so if you wouldn't mind coming down to the front. And we're going to be sharing experiences really of, in practice, how can you utilise housing first as a solution to street homelessness. And I'm delighted that we've got colleagues coming from Portugal, Hungary, France and Finland to share their experiences with us this afternoon. I'll just let everybody get settled. Excellent. So I mentioned at the beginning of this session that World Habitat's work with organisations tackling homelessness for over 40 years. Our World Habitat Awards were established 30 years ago as our contribution at the time to the United Nations Year of Shelter for the Homeless. And I don't think when that idea was first mooted that we realised how important organisations like yours within social housing and those of you who are working on ending street homelessness would become to our organisation. And as you'll be hearing today, so much of our work has been inspired by organisations like yourselves. So one of the most important things that we've done in the last few years is a campaign called the European End Street Homelessness Campaign. And that was inspired by the work of 2 World Habitat Award winners, 100,000 homes in America, that some of you may have come across, and the second by the Y Foundation in Finland, which is why today has been so important to us to actually be here and to share those experiences with you. Both projects really successfully championed the use of Housing First to significantly reduce chronic rough sleeping. And in 2015, we organised a visit of housing practitioners like yourselves from around the world who said that they were really interested in learning about the work in Finland and how they were going about ending street homelessness. And I have to say that visit, you know, we often talk about things inspiring us, but for World Habitat, that was a real change in our approach for those who came on that visit and also for our own organisation. It really gave us the chance to think quite differently about what we needed to do to stop managing homelessness and really start ending it. And I'm hoping that some of you, if you haven't had the chance to hear about Y Foundation and some of the people who've been inspired by it will have a chance to do so today. Many of the people who went on that visit returned home and really committed to actually saying that is our goal. Our goal is to end homelessness, and that is what we will focus on. So today, we as I say, we're going to hear from 4 very different experiences on that journey. And in turn, I'm going to invite each of our panels to come up, explain about the work that they're doing and the challenges they've had so far. And then we'll have a discussion and an opportunity for you to ask questions. So I'd like to start first with Américo Nave, Director of CRESCER in Portugal, to share his experience. Thank you. Water.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you to World Habitat for invitation and for the opportunity to be part of this event. CRESCER is an NGO with 20 years of experience working with vulnerable groups in outreach settings, providing harm reduction and other services for 2,000 people per year in Lisbon. These are all our ongoing projects and projects aimed at people experiencing homelessness are outreach teams. They carry out daily supports in order to promote harm reduction for around 1,500 people. Most of our work is invested in the development and relationship of proximity and trust with these populations. With other is a Housing First program, and other is a social business designed to train and integrate people who have experienced homelessness into the labor market. The methodology of this project was designed and created for this target group and combines training and on-the-job experience culminating in reference and inclusion in the labor market. In a social diagnosis conducted in 2012 in Lisbon, had more than 650 people experiencing homelessness, living on the streets, most of them using drugs. This diagnosis identified several social problems: extreme physical and psychological vulnerability, many people who use psychoactive substances, and a high number of situations of extreme social exclusion. These were people marginalized from all social health structures, support structures, with no contact with any organization. In this context, CRESCER implemented É Uma Casa Lisboa Housing First program in 2013, targeting people who experience homelessness and use drugs. This project respects the principles of the original Housing First model. There are no preconditions for people to engage in the program. The only scream that is made is to ensure that the most vulnerable and the ones with the most problematic drugs use are admitted first. Any chronic homeless person could engage in the program. A person who uses drugs, who refugees psychiatric treatment or medications, has no documentations or Portuguese nationality, is in a irregular situation, has time in prison, or has pets. Everyone is welcome. Since the beginning of the program until March 2022, 131 people were enrolled in the program and almost 19% did not return to their previous situations, which is the main focus of Housing First. This number has been constant over the years and is in the line with Housing First's worldwide results. Sorry. I will now go briefly through our most important results. When we observe data at this stage, we see that after entering the program, 100 reduce the use the psychoactive substances. Most of them have changed the way of consumption from injected to smoked, reducing the risks associated with injecting. Relapse happen, but usually people don't return to the initial standpoint, being obvious the pathways for recovery. More than 40% stopped using drugs and alcohol. We also see improvements in linkage and adherence to drugs treatment or low threshold opioid substitution treatment. When it comes to health, more than 70% of the people were engaged with healthcare services, while only 20% did so when they were in homeless situations. Between 75% to 94% adhere to medication and psychiatric medication when in the Housing First program, while then more than 21% used to it. In terms of social supports, 90% now have documentation, the double compared to the homeless situation. Approximately 30% developed of reestablished family ties. In comparison with more traditional approach, we observe daily the improvement of personal development and well-being and the investment in personal care and household management. People take part in the community as any other resident. The housing enables the person to participate in daily life interaction with neighbors or other people in public spaces and services which promotes community integration. We also highlight difference in aspects like autonomy and empowerment. It is a client-centered approach where the person has always an active voice and the possibility to choose, to have access and address and the key. Autonomy to care, to take decisions and customize in own space. It promotes greater community integration and participation. Housing remains essential to the social integration process. Also, an increased sense of autonomy leads to a greater sense to belonging. Here, João cooking for the first time in his house. Tenants actively participating in program decisions. Tenants advocating for housing first in the meeting with Lisbon City Hall representatives. Tenants advocating for housing first at the conferences. Being heard and sharing their experience in the European Council ministers. They be inviting to prepare to lunch for the European Council ministers. And appearing side by side with Portuguese Minister of Labour, Solidarity and Social Security. This is why we need to invest in methodologies that promote people's dignity, choice, and self-determination. These are some of the main challenges we have faced over these years with our Housing First programs. Make the model self-sustainably. Arranging houses at affordable rents for people who do not need anymore to benefit from a Housing First program. To specialize the team in different areas of interventions. Having research for researchers. Developing a Housing First project has been teaching us a lot in working with beneficiaries, with partners, with landlords, and with the community. These are just some of those lessons learned. Effective response needs to be grounded on the lived experience of people and to address beneficiaries. And integrate strategies to tackle homelessness should include strong community-wide prevention of poverty and homelessness. Long-term solution focus on housing, support toward recovery, community integrations, and labor market integrations. Quality and easy access to temporary housing solutions for people who recently became homeless. In these integrated strategies, people with lived experience are the best partners to find effective solutions and should be listened and enrolled in these teams as peers. In the way of solving homelessness, local governments and other key stakeholders need to start from the beginning, getting in touch with the reality, reach the people with lived experience. This field work and advocacy strategies are very important first step in the way of solving homelessness. Our experience has helped us to find different strategies to overcome the challenge. Invite policymakers from governments and oppositions and from parties of different scale to visit the projects. Proposing the implementation of a pilot project has a starting point. Empirical experience with visible results promotes a great willingness to support the project. Support policymakers with scientific knowledge and data. Let the tenants give their testimony in public context. Keep the model true to the original model and support with scientific evidence. Thank you.
Thank you. And I know we're going to have plenty of questions at the end, but I think for me what shone through was lived experience and really involving tenants in the solution making, but also sort of learning together and sharing some of those challenges. So I would like to ask Vera to join us from Streets to Home in Hungary. Thank you.
Okay, so hi everyone, I hope you can hear me well. And please, since I'm not a very experienced speaker and nor a native English speaker, if you have to ask something to ask, please. And I will try to introduce our work to you. But as you have seen, I've prepared a slide But first, I want to make a change and not talk about what I have put on the slides, but introduce a piece of our history, because most of the speakers before were mentioning housing first as national level policies. Well, that's absolutely not our case, because our organization is a very small one and 100% grassroots. So as an organization, it was founded 10 years ago at a table of that size, probably, with 2 of my social workers colleagues. And with one of those, we are still leading the organization till today. And by the time we have more than 90 tenants in the core program, and we have 2 more housing programs as well, but it's still at small and local scale. So I'm gonna share like field experiences and not policy level ones, unfortunately. So to start with an overview, what are we up to? Our first program is called From Huts to Homes, and this is the one based on housing first approach. And I will explain why I call it based and not a proper housing first one, but it's basically due to funding and political environment. And then there we have a small social housing agency, which provides not the cheapest, but still affordable housing for both formerly homeless people and social worker colleagues as well. Also, we have a weekly support group for job seekers. Let them be our tenants or outside the organization. And just now, we also launched a women's support group as well, which is in a pilot phase, so I didn't present it here. Then we are now organizing a program for housing Ukrainian refugees, and this is a big task for us. So this meant doubling our number of tenants in just a couple of weeks, but I'm not going to focus on this program, but if you want to ask, I will be available. And then we also have social entrepreneurship in progress. And if you will check out our website, you will find more information. But in this very presentation, I'm going to focus on the first one, From Huts to Homes program, which has been running for almost a decade now. And yes. So when I say From Huts to Homes, it's quite depictive. On this picture, you can see one of our first tenants living in a forest hut she built for herself. And then what we do is we actually renovate vacant houses with the help of volunteers to turn them into proper homes, and so that people can move in. And basically that's how we have our more than 90 tenants by now, building houses for them and involving them in building those houses. And the funny thing is that we are not meant to build houses. You see, we are social workers like most service providers are. And we decided to go this way because we didn't see any other way how to find those properties. So I can reflect back to the previous conversation on how we provide houses when we actually don't have. Well, we decided to make and reuse. These apartments are basically ruins. So we rebuild them, to say the correct term. And so about who we are a small NGO, and we are rooted in rather activism than in service provision. And we don't receive funding as a service provider. We do our job based on donations and campaigning, which is not an easy thing to do, but I'm not going to talk much about it. And now our first tenants has moved in just in the beginning of 2013. So we're going to celebrate that anniversary pretty soon. But we started 10 years ago. And at the moment, we have a staff of 25 mostly part-time workers, We also have many volunteers, many trainees. And as I already mentioned, we have more than 90 tenants in the core program, plus the other programs. And that's our staff at this point, and me sitting with our co-founder and friend. And so why did we have to step in as a service provider when we originally started as activists? That's a good question, and I never stop asking that from myself. And it is because how Hungarian social policies are and how the homeless care system is. And as a social worker, when working on the field, me and my colleagues felt that we were constantly in a double stress. So not only the job is hard and stressful, as you know, social work is, but we had to face the problem that we couldn't offer services that were respecting people's human rights or even giving them a chance to step one step higher. So we decided to set up our own organizations. And so what are those policy circumstances in Hungary? There are 11,000 shelter places only in homeless care system, and more shelter places for family shelters, which are not considered to be the part of homeless care system, but still we must talk about homeless families as well. And there are 12,000 shelter places for disabled people, but still many disabled people are living in homeless shelters as well. And at the same time, there are 100,000 housing units owned by municipalities, but many of them are actually not in use because they are in so bad shape. And on the other hand, even the ones that are in use are not necessarily available for homeless people because they rent it out to whoever they want, basically. And I will share more details about that later if I have time. So, and I can also reflect back to the previous conversation we had about financialization. Both rental and buying prices are skyrocketing in Budapest. So since there is no sufficient affordable house system and no big chances for people to buy, there is not much left. So we at least wanted to implement a pilot. And at the same time, we didn't only want to implement a pilot, but prepare suggestions for any political decision makers on what to do about housing crisis. And all the opposition parties now had signed actually this document, but we can't do much about it since they are in opposition. And so I don't know how these initiatives gonna be implemented. Anyhow, what we do in From Huts to Homes programs is that we try to show that housing first does work in the Hungarian housing environment. And we do provide housing and we do the advocacy part as well. And in our core program of this Housing First Base program is in the 10th district of Budapest, where at the moment we have 26 flats. And now this slide is a bit mixed up because 100 plus volunteers each year is for the whole Housing First program. And in the Hungarian homeless society consists of many old people, because many has lost their habitation at the political transition and never had a proper habitation ever since. So we have many elderly people amongst our clients. So I have to say that not only young people but old people need special assistance when it comes to housing first, because we need to look for many healthcare services. We need to look for many life and end-of-life services like palliative partners, because our tenants are constantly dying, obviously, because they are old people. And this is not something we have a lot of talk even in the social care system, so these are hard tasks to handle. and we need to cooperate with others to solve all these problems. And about the difference we make, so as you see, this is a house we actually built ourselves, and it may look a bit shabby compared to the nice apartments we see in previous pictures, but this couple had been spent like 20 years in homelessness before, and they have been paying the rent for this small house for the past couple of years, so this is a big change we could make with them. And actually the man himself did build the 90% of this roof you can see on the picture. So this is something. And on the other picture, you can see my social worker colleague sitting with a family reuniting after being separated in different shelter places for long, long years. And now they are sitting at a Christmas table at one of our Christmas parties. So this is about the different we make. And I'm so much over time, so I will try to... Yes, okay. So I will say just a quick words. So Samara did introduce you with Housing First principles. And that's what we try to do, introducing Hungarian society and social workers with Housing First principles. And we have hard time respecting them ourselves because of the circumstances we work in. But this very core thing that housing is a human right is something we have on the flag. And we try to do our work respecting that. And the other thing is flexible support for as long as needed is what we can respect, and we can... and so we still visit the very first tenants who moved into us almost 10 years ago. Of course, those visits are now not very regular, but in every couple of months we do check on them still. And separation of housing and treatment means that we will not kick out people from our programs when they do not want to say the addictologist, even if they have one. But most of them do have, so I can very much relate to Américo's speech as well, that attitudes are pretty much changing even if we don't push, and especially if we don't push. So this is a picture of our very first client who still lives with us, and one of the very newest clients we have. And now I'm just going to skip this because I don't have time, but I still want to share something about the lessons learned. And so, especially in a political environment like we work in Hungary, advocacy is a must. And I don't think that social services will change without that work. And we have to just try, and in our case, we do need these small-scale pilots. And when it comes to the Hungarian political situation, I have to share that maybe it's the same in most of your countries, that most social workers are women and most social leaders and decision makers are men. So you can see on the last picture, me, one of our clients, and one major and another colleague talking in front of the parliament building in Budapest, because I think that we have to change this too. So about social care system, everything is political. So now that's why we try to make our work feminist. And our next step is basically Housing First shall be feminist when it comes to clients, when it comes to leadership, and when it comes to organizing advocacy. And if you wanted to reach us, you can do that.
Well, I know we're going to have an interesting debate later. Thank you, Vera. That was great. And one of the many things I'll be taking away from that is actually the reality is of actually building, repairing houses, finding the houses yourself and taking charge. I think that was, definitely something for me to take away. I'd like to now invite up Etienne Fabris, Resident Mobility Manager from Lyon, France. Thank you.
It should. Okay, it works. Hello, my name is Etienne Fabris. First of all, I want to apologize for my level of English because I try to do my best. I'll try to speak without notes, but no. After you are maybe, but if I forgot something. But I'll try to explain what I want to share, but if it's not the case, don't. You have to be indulgent. A few words about my organization, because I work in the city of Lyon in France, and it's a specific organization called the GIE La Ville Autrement. GIE means Economic Interest Grouping, and La Ville Autrement, you could translate it by making the city differently. It's a grouping that gathers free social housing organizations, free social housing providers, and 2 NGOs specialized on fighting homelessness. And I don't know in the other countries, but in France, it's not so frequent that NGOs and social housing providers are in the same group and want to volunteer to work together. And that's the case in my organizations. So the goal of the GIE is to develop a common project with the 5 members. And I work in developing social housing programs. I will have a few words more with one of the members, which is Métropole Habitat, which is the most important, the greatest company in the GIE. It is social housing providers linked to the Métropole of Lyon with 17,000 flats. And it is one of the members of the Housing First Hub since the beginning. So I will try to share the programs developed from Métropole Habitat for the last 5 years. And this, oh, it should work this way. No, it's okay. It's okay. So here are the 5 members. It's quite my notes. Okay. So about the we could say that the Housing First programs we try to develop are in 5 main directions. First of all, we try to mobilize the existing dwellings that are owned by Métropole Habitat, and each year there are about 40 flats who are rent to NGOs for Housing First programs. In these programs, I don't know if you have heard about it, but there is the first program developed in France called Un chez soi d'abord, and other kind of programs such as Housing First for Youth, or people who are getting out institutions such as jail or psychiatric hospital. And so each year about 40 flats are designed for this kind of homeless people. Another development is we try to build a specific program. These specific programs, about 1 or 2 programs each year, they are programs that we could say semi-collective or shared housing solutions for people who are suffering from loneliness. So they have independent homes and shared spaces with supports and services for them. Thirdly, Juha told us just before that it was very difficult to mobilize the private sector. So now it's still a project, but to try to develop for the next 5 years, linked to the Métropole of Lyon to buy and to renovate about 3,050 flats for the next 5 years. And these flats are destined for Housing First programs. But it's a project we are trying to working the economic model and the partnership about it, but who worked about this project even yesterday. Firstly, we are working about the mobilizations of temporary town planning opportunities. This kind of project don't respect all the principles of the Housing First model, as Samara told us before, because there are temporary solutions. But many of the principles in this kind of project are respected because it is important to say that these solutions, first of all, I have to explain what are these kind of opportunities. In the GIE, our job is to buy some lands in order to develop constructions, and in the lands we are buying, most of the time there are some buildings, and there is a time, we call it intercalary time, that we try to manage in order for the year these opportunities are available, we try to use them instead of securing them for preventing squat, for example. So most of the time when we buy a building before renovating it or creating another building, it lasts many years, most of the time 4 or 5 years. So we use this kind of opportunities, especially for migrant people who are not afford to go to the social housing sector when they don't have the papers to go to it. And it's important to say as well that in this kind of opportunities, we don't ask people to leave them without a solution. We try to get a solution after that, and this represents independent flats. People have the keys, and we try. The other principles of the Housing First model are respected, but it's only the fact that it is temporary, a long-term temporary, but temporary. And these kind of solutions are not. They can be important. For instance, last year, with the city of Villeurbanne, which is the second city in the Métropole of Lyon, the local authority let us 140 flats for the next 4 years. So we have 200 homeless people who are living there, and it can be a good opportunity to mobilize. And last but not least, as you can see, we try to develop mobile and modular answers, not low-cost housing solutions, the same characteristics than what we do in social housing, but the goal is to use the lands that are available for as for the temporary solutions, but we buy some lands, and sometimes the land is available many years, so we can move the solutions after. Over these 5 achievements, we try as well. Samara spoke before about the importance of prevention. So we try to work differently with evictions from social housing and to prevent homelessness as well. But it would be a little long to explain. So the main lesson learned from our experience, it was said before, it is important to say to affirm the benefits of the Housing First model. I didn't notice it here, but the first benefits, of course, is for the people concerned. Another benefits, according to me, is the favorable evolution for the representations. Since we have been developing this kind of programs, most of the salaries of the companies, they stop thinking about predictability for the capacity to live in a house. I think it's over now, and it's a good evolution. Another evolution is, positive evolution is with Housing First, it's a good means to develop and to work differently between NGOs and social housing providers. Most of the time, NGOs think that the people they support, they own the people they support, and the social housing providers think that the flats they own, they are the only responsible to the use of these flats. And I think with Housing First, we are all together linked to public policies and for the general interest, and we try to go over this representation. It's a good means for changing the model. And of course, there is a positive change of practices. The NGOs we work with are using peer workers and are working with all the things you know more than me. After the benefits, I wanted to notice, for me, 3 limits. Now, not about the Housing First, but the limits of the Housing First policy in France. The first limits for me is the lack of affordable solutions. It is the key point. If you don't have enough affordable house to propose to people, you can't develop Housing First programs. And in France now, the period is not as good as it should be because, for instance, we have a new government and we have no ministry for housing policy for now. I hope we will have someone, but it means it is not the priority it should be. The second limit is that it is very difficult, I don't know in the other countries, but in France, it is very difficult to have a global approach about the costs. And for me, we must have a global cost approach because with the Housing First, in France, we have the national state, we have the local state, we have local authorities, we have the Métropole, we have a lot of actors. And with the Housing First, it means that some of the actors are making savings, whereas the others have more costs to support. And there is no, between accommodations and housing, they are not the same actors, and it is very important to have a level who has the lead in order to organize the global cost approach. And it's not the case for now. And the last limit I wanted to point is about the migrants who don't have the papers or the right to go to social housing solutions. And I think it would be a mistake to think that Housing First policy, if we say that migrants without papers are not concerned, we don't work with the main issue, because nowadays in France, but I think in other countries concerned by migration, most of the costs in the temporary accommodations are linked to migrants, and shelters or hostel. It costs a lot of money. It is not adapted for families, and we should find solutions to develop Housing First approach for this population as well. Thank you.
Thank you. And I think really some great, I mean, for me, what shone through was the partnerships, and I'm sure we've got quite a few questions about that later. But also in terms of those challenges, and it's great that the hub is here as well in terms of looking for solutions, because I think as you were saying, those are really reflected in terms of actually how many of our partners have raised very similar, and I think there's a real opportunity there for us to act together and look at some of those policy areas that we could work on. I'd now like to invite our final, but by no means last speaker, to kind of share his experience with us. Juha Kaakinen, the former CEO, I have to say, in retirement, still actually coming and sharing his experience from the Y Foundation. If you'd like to join us, please. Or you're going to.
Thank you. This works. So actually, I retired from the post of Chief Executive Officer of Y Foundation a few months ago. Still doing some small work for them for a few moments, but my main job at this time is to warm the sauna, or actually 2 saunas. So, but I would, before you all fall asleep, I would like to start with a very provocative question. I think that everybody who works in the homelessness sector should answer one question: do I want to end homelessness, or am I happy to implement the original Housing First pathways model? So this is a very provocative question. I have very great respect for Sam Tsemperis, known him for quite a long time, had several discussions with him, but I just would like to remind that the original model was developed in the last century in a different, a very specific setting in New York for people who were coming out from mental health institutions. So my question is that should we have time to update Housing First? And the other thing that I would like to say to you is that if there's one thing that I would like you to remember after your visit here is that the Finnish Housing First model is not an implementation of the staircase model. It has its own birth history, and there are some obvious differences in the practical implementation, although the general principles are exactly the same. And I would describe the core of the Finnish Housing First by saying that the key is the psychological or the moral aspect. The client is no longer a client or a patient, but a normal person with control over his or her apartment and control over the normal everyday aspects of life. Housing First, for me, it's not a static ideological fixed concept. It's a way of delivering housing to clients that is normal, kind, and common sense. I have already heard during these days many people say that, yes, of course, we would have Housing First, we would upscale it if we only had the housing. So the obvious thing is that you can't have Housing First without having Housing First. So that's the starting point of actually the Finnish approach, that we look how we can provide the housing needed. And I will say a few words about Y Foundation because the last 9 years of my working life has been there. But I was also involved in the planning process when we made the Finnish national program to end long-term homelessness and formulated the homelessness policy in Finland. And actually, I'm the guilty one who labeled it Housing First without knowing of this other Housing First that already existed. But this picture maybe explains something about the role of the Y Foundation in Finland and the role and the importance of housing. So I didn't have the last one of the housing that Y Foundation had at the end of last year. This is only the housing that's earmarked for homeless persons. Y Foundation has also affordable social housing. At the moment, Y Foundation is the 4th biggest landlord in Finland and the biggest national social housing provider. So the total housing stock is over 18,000 apartments at the moment. The Why Foundation was established in 1985 with the sole mission to end the homelessness of single homeless persons. And that explains also the name of the Why Foundation. It comes from a Finnish word, yksinäinen, which means a single or a lonely person. And it was established by the 5 biggest cities: Finnish Red Cross, Finnish Mental Health Association, Finnish Church, Finnish Trade Union of Construction Workers, Finnish Construction Industry, and Finnish Association of Municipalities. And actually also the state alcohol company was one of the founders in the beginning, but they later skipped out of the foundation. So it has a very broad social background. And the original idea was that the foundation would start buying apartments from the private market to be used as rental apartments for homeless persons. And that's something that the foundation has been doing since 1985, since the beginning. But this also illustrates that if you are relying totally on scattered housing, it will take some time to get that housing. The Finnish model was that we would buy the apartments with a grant that we got from the Slot Machine Association. So this is one of the key elements of the Finnish housing first model, that we have different housing options, not only scattered housing. You asked about the problems in the previous session, and my colleagues answered and told how things are dealt in a supported housing unit setting. But in scattered housing, it can be sometimes very problematic. And believe me that we have had these issues over the years with at the moment over 7,000 scattered housing apartments. So for that reason, you need to have different housing options. And this was the other element of the Finnish policy that was started in 2008, that we aimed to have a systemic change from temporary accommodation to permanent housing. And it meant, as Juha already described, that some of the shelters and hostels were renovated into supported housing, which means that everyone has their independent rental apartment, but there can be on-site staff to provide support. And that can be important in cases that you have very intensive care needs, as some of the long-term homeless people certainly have. So these are the key elements of the Finnish model: systemic change from temporary accommodation to permanent housing. The housing should be normal rental apartment with your own rental contract and on support if you need it. But I think that it's also important that there's flexibility how you arrange the support. So in the Finnish model, it goes from a very intensive support in the supported housing units to a more flexible arrangement in the scattered housing setting. So that's probably one of the important elements also. But Why Foundation has also work activities or work programs. Actually, some years ago, Foundation started a program where Why Foundation offers job opportunities for tenants, both in the affordable social housing and also in the special housing for homeless persons. And there are normal jobs, for example, in the real estate management and normal salary, but they can be short term. But quite a lot of our tenants have been using these possibilities. And I think that providing job opportunities can be one of the most effective forms of support. What else would I say? Well, we aim to end homelessness in Finland. And the important lesson probably is that this should be a national issue. It's very difficult to upscale housing first based on the original model. I have not seen in 20 years that no country has upscaled that actually totally on a national level. And I think that there's a risk that Housing First ends becoming a very specialized, only one service option among others, and that's not going to end homelessness. And for that reason, there has to be a lot of flexibility how you arrange the support services. Some 20 years ago, I was involved in an evaluation that we did of a day center that Helsinki Diakonis Institute opened for people who were HIV positive and who had drug problems. And there was a highly qualified multi-professional team for them. There were psychiatrists, doctors, psychiatric nurses, social workers, whatever you could imagine. And then we asked of the clients that what was the service that they most needed. And the main response was that the social worker, simply because the social worker took care of their daily things like welfare benefits and arranging the housing. So for that reason, I think that you must have multi-professional support available, but how you arrange it, there has to be a lot of flexibility also in that respect. Well, I think that not many are sleeping yet, so I will probably end at this point to leave room for discussion also. Thank you.
And I always like to start, I think that's always great to start with a challenge, isn't it? We're just going to all come together and then we're going to come back to you, the audience, in terms of any questions. I think we've kind of done quite a tour there of different sorts of organisations implementing Housing First and the different challenges, you know, and I really thank the panel for actually being very honest and transparent about some of those challenges. So I'd like to come over to the audience in terms of if anyone's got any questions that they would like answered. Thank you. No. I've heard good news about the pink one.
This one is working for sure. Sorry. Peter from Poland. We are a group of Polish NGOs working on Housing First from Gdańsk, Warsaw, and Wrocław. And I have a question to you. What does it mean to you when you are talking and discussing the issue of ending homelessness? But I would like to hear from you more on the personal level rather than on the systemical level. Does it mean when you are talking about ending homelessness, does it mean when the person is having an apartment and a lease and he became or she became a tenant, does it mean maybe his own perception of ending homelessness? Because our experience from Poland is sometimes it's different. Do you mean also sometimes a period of time when the people are staying within the home and became sustainable, stable within the home? Or you also mean dealing or being in the process of recovering, well-being? This is the open questions to you.
Well, my answer would be that homelessness ends when you have a rental apartment of your own. Then you are like everybody else who is living in a rental apartment. You may have needs for support, you may have needs for social assistance, whatever. But because housing and service support are separated, so you are not anymore a homeless person. If that's not the point, when will homelessness of a homeless person end? if it doesn't end when you get a home of your own. That's my my question. Of course, we may have different views how people have recovered, etc. But it's a different process. So, in terms of thinking about ending homelessness, that's the point. Also on a personal level. Of course, I was talking much about the systemic level because I don't think that on a personal level we can't get results unless we have like we have in Finland, housing first as a national policy, the Finnish housing first as a national policy. So we expect all services to work according to these principles and the model. It's not always the case, of course. It's not a. I wouldn't picture a too rosy picture of the Finnish case because it's not. We have not fixed homelessness totally, but we are determined to do it, and it means that we have a national political will to do it. We have a wide partnership between the state, local authorities, NGOs working towards the same goal, and I think that that's extremely meaningful because it means that we can set goals, how many apartments we need this year and next year. And as I mentioned, Y Foundation has over 18,000 apartments. In principle, we could fix the homelessness in Finland, but it's not possible for a single actor. It's something that has to be done together with all the people and organizations involved in ending homelessness.
Thank you. Would anyone else like to comment on that?
For us, the apartments in the housing first is a permanent housing for no a time. And one of the rules, people need pay 30%. And when this is advantage the individual approach because some of people have employment and pay 30% of this employment, and sometimes said, okay, I don't need to support the team in my apartment, and I prefer stay with the apartment in the relation directly with landlord, or go out with and come the other person.
I like to add one more element in Finland. When you have a former homeless person, when he gets or she gets an apartment with your own rental contract, you are like everybody else. You have the same rights and same obligations. It means also that we suppose that you pay the rent, and if you can't do it, you have the same rights. You can apply for the general housing benefit like everybody else. So as soon as possible, we kind of aim to have the very wide principle of normality in things. And I think that's important also.
I would just complete most of the things have been said, and I think you gave even answers in your questions. But for me, ending homelessness means that we stop considering that homeless people are like a risk. They are not a risk. And we have to give them different solutions in order to give them the choice. But something important, you've just said it, is permanent solutions. And
Thank you. Any other questions from the floor?
Hi again, still Selene from Eurocities. First of all, I wanted to thank you for highlighting that housing first can look different in different places. I think it's an important point if we want to move forward, that we don't apply like a very strict vision of it. It needs to be adapted to the different context. The second thing is, I really second the comment from the colleague from Lyon saying that we have a problem about people with migrants background or EU mobile citizen not being eligible to many of the Housing First programs. So my question is, and then what do we do about that? What can we do? Because it's a huge group of people who are very vulnerable, experiencing homelessness, and very often excluded from the programs and the solutions we're talking about. Thank you.
Thank you. Who would like to come in and talk about work with migrants?
Well, do you have migrant tenants as well? So I mean, I will leave everyone else to answer to this question, but in our case, all our services are available to migrant people if they are homeless. So I don't think that there shall be a difference made, and I think this difference made is artificial based on administration of national eligibility criteria, so that's not a professional eligibility criteria at all, and should be dismissed. And basically that's it. And when it comes to eligibility, then in the case of our clients, for example, there are migrant families who actually need less assistance than native families. So, I mean, being migrant on its own, it's not a housing need by definition. It's a housing need because we say that they are not eligible for housing programs. So, I mean, it's just the other way around, I could say.
Américo, do you want to come in? I know you've done quite a bit of work.
I think it's important. The project is independent. The work in the our example, we receive the money, and who make the rules is us. Who put in the house is our problem, not who put the money. And the rule is for homeless people. If are migrants or consumption drugs or are in the irregular situation in Portugal, this is our problem, because these people are in homeless situation. But in Portugal, we invited for create a program, a specific program, for refugees, because our experience with Housing First, City Hall, invite us for do the same with refugees staying in Lisbon.
Thank you. Any other?
I only want to complete by saying that, of course, this problem is a political issue. And I don't know, many migrants are not afford to stay in the country and can't be evicted. So it's a political issue. But the thing I know is that when we think that giving bad solutions to them will prevent other people from coming in the country is not true. So nowadays we have solutions that cost a lot of money and that are not adapted. But it's a political issue.
Any other questions from the floor? I mean, one thing that I wanted to ask was about partnerships and you know, who you've been working with and who you think, if you were giving advice to others, are some of the key partnerships that people should be forming. Anything about that?
Well, about the... No, it works. I said the partnership in the GIE was important. It's important to say that we work in an area in the Métropole of Lyon where there are many actors. There are about 30 social housing providers and the same numbers of NGOs. So the partnership in the GIE is the means to have a strategy of alliance, can you say it? In order to have to share projects and to each actor, each company is independent, but they are linked in a group, so that they are self-confident, and if they are self-confident, they want to develop project together. So I think it is important in the partnership to act that the companies don't do the same job. Some of them will be specialized on supporting people. The other will be specialized on financial approaches or developing constructions or managing flats. And it is important to gather competences to develop adapted responses and not to try to do the job of others, because many NGOs want to develop construction because they don't have help to develop by social housing providers. And social housing providers want to develop supports because they don't have links with NGOs. And it is very important to have a partnership to work together.
Well, I think that partnership has been the key issue for Y Foundation since the beginning. And there we have also had this separation of housing and support, because most of our partners have been providing the support that the tenants have needed. But I would also say that there are different models how you can work. So Y Foundation actually started to build its own affordable social housing. And it has been an important thing for us, because it has also showed us, we have seen the things in the eyes of the landlord also. So it has also helped to understand the needs of the partners in the business.
Excellent, thank you. One thing I wanted to ask Vera was, at the beginning you talked very much about what a challenging political and funding context it was in Hungary. I suppose I was quite interested in, you know, you've given up so much time to kind of come here and share with us. I mean, what support do you think other partners could give to your work, or how important is it for you to be in part of a much wider campaign?
Yes, I will need the microphone. I've gathered them all up here. Okay. Yeah, so the microphone situation is getting serious as well. And so when it comes to us, since there are social services founded on national level, but those are only shelters. But it's not only about funding, and if there were a political will to support Housing First initiatives, obviously there would be a funding to do that. So I think for us, being acknowledged at World Habitat Awards and then joining your network meant that we could prove that we are valid and we could have a powerful position, even when actually both governing and opposition parties are not showing much interest in solving the problems of homelessness so far. So I think that European attention can help putting pressure on national governments that are not willing to issue certain pressing social problems. And what I have to say is that I traveled to Brussels once to actually a Fianza event, and then I went to a site visit with street social workers, and the very first homeless man I met on the streets of Brussels was a Hungarian-speaking Romanian man. So it's not that you don't have to work with our problems, because you just can't escape that. And it's the same problem as if migrants are eligible for your social services, well, they will be there with you if they are not eligible. And unfortunately or fortunately, well, it's you can decide, but we Hungarians and other Eastern Europeans gonna there gonna be there with you, even if it's not addressed. So I think it's our fight, but it's a common fight too. So there are, I think, advantages in for both sides in you working with us. But of course, first benefits come to us that on the first hand we have the power and means to continue what we started. But then I hope that it can get back to you in this sense.
Yeah, and I think that importance of working together, really coming together on some of these key policy issues and supporting each other. I think events like today, and we heard very much from the hub in terms of the support and solidarity that's available and the experience that people are willing to share is very important. I'm just going to see if there's any final questions that people want to share before I'm going to turn. I didn't warn you of this, but I do have one question I'd like to ask you at the end. Any other questions? No? Well, one thing I wanted to ask is that obviously we talked about the fact that World Habitat celebrated your work over 10 years ago at the Y Foundation, and really you've been a beacon to many organisations around Europe and around the world. But I suppose what we're quite interested in is, where do you see the Y Foundation? Now you don't have to do it, but in 10 years' time, where would you like to see the Y Foundation and Housing First generally?
Well, according to the Y Foundation strategy, after 10 years, it will be concentrating very much on the issues of climate change in housing, because we should have ended homelessness by that time. But I think that the Y Foundation has a very strong base now with the housing stock that it has, but I'm sure that there will be changes, and one of the major changes affecting also Y Foundation is the administrative reform of social and health services in Finland, where services are transferred from the municipalities to regional authorities, and it will provide some difficulties for many organizations. But I think that there's a very strong, motivated personnel, and my successor is extremely good. So I'm very confident of the future of the Y Foundation. Although, of course, the idea of Y Foundation has been to make itself unnecessary, because the aim was to end homelessness. So maybe they have to figure out something else to do after that. But I would like to end by saying that I really liked when Vera said something about feminist housing first. I won't elaborate more on this, but I still think that in the housing first model there's a hint of a paternalistic element. So, but we can discuss that with you later.
I'm glad you picked that up for us to definitely talk about later. Well, I would like to thank all of our 6 speakers and our audience here and at home in terms of all the contributions that you've made today. I think it's been a really great session. I hope that people have taken away plenty of ideas and some connections, and we'll follow up with the hub or our individual speakers here, or World Habitat. We're always really keen to hear from people that are involved in inspiring work. We're always very keen to connect people. We think that's where the solutions are. So if there are things that you would like to share with us, we're really keen to hear from you. So thank you for such a great session. I look forward to spending some time with all of you later on this evening and sharing ideas and solutions. So thank you very much for everyone. Thank you.